Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Powerhouse Podcast. I am your host, Candy Barone, and let me tell you, I am super thrilled and delighted because I have just a powerhouse who is joining us in the ring today. But before I introduce her and let you see why I am so excited that she is here, let me remind you that this is our space to have the deep, courageous, connected conversations. This is really a platform to redefine what leadership really means. And as you know, we always talk about leadership being a choice. It's a choice in how you choose to show up, how you choose to serve others, and how you choose to take personal responsibility in that space. So welcome. We are so glad to have you here. And with that, let me say welcome to my guest, Leslie Juvin Acker. Did I say that right?
Very nice. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I'm working on it. I love it. And she's going to say it herself because the way she says it just sounds so beautiful. So
yeah, it's Leslie Juvin Acker.
I'm going to say that a couple times because I love the way it rolls. So let me tell you a little bit about Leslie Juvin Acker, as she is the president and chief happiness officer at Leslie Inc., with over 10 years as a career development, emotional intelligence expert for global industry leaders, including IBM, Adidas, and Facebook. Leslie has coached hundreds of individuals, helping them overcome divorce, career transition, and debt. In one remarkable story, she helped a client eliminate over $170,000 of debt in less than a week. Woo! I know some of you are like, okay, how do I do that? I gotcha.
Tell me more.
Working poverty, she developed the money formula to empower people to overcome poverty, believing that everyone is capable of financial abundance. Love that. Through her unique techniques, inspirational lessons, and charismatic personality, Leslie has grown as a loyal following of happy campers. We're going to play very well together as we talk about Camp Candy all the time. Happy campers, her message is happiness, and she teaches leaders to find their state of happiness with intuitive insight, practical advice, and simple solutions. And I have to say, I'm so blown away in the fact that you talk about both money and happiness in the same space. And so I want to jump in and start right there. I want to talk about how those two things play in space, because for some people are like, okay, I get the money stuff, and I hear you say that you're all about helping people uncover this level of happiness, and that feels very separate or woo-woo or something that's way over here. How does money and happiness play together?
So money and happiness plays an integral role in our lives. And we have conditioned ourselves from childhood to think money and to be unhappy. And it really is about looking at how we think about money from an emotional and psychological point of view. And a lot of times we can grasp financial concepts and we can be very financially literate, as I am. But there was a time where I did not feel happy when I thought about money. And over the course of these years that I've been working with professionals, I had to take a step back and go, okay, I'm helping these people, but I wasn't feeling happy myself. And that's why I went on this journey of creating the money formula, was to help people in a very simple, practical way to associate the two, which can be very tricky if you try to do it on your own and try to will your way into feeling good about money. It doesn't always work.
Right. So talk a little bit about your journey. I mean, you talk about coming from working poverty, and I can relate to that in, great ways. And so as you've gone through that journey to come up with this space where you're really creating the money formula, talk about how your journey got you here.
So it's kind of a long journey, but I'm going to short story. Well, I grew up as a part of the working poor. And in fact, a lot of us Americans don't even realize that we're in the working poor. The working poor are people who barely make just enough money to pay all of their bills. And there's usually two adults who are working in a home and they're not making enough. And these people are working full time, at least over 35 hours a week. And my parents were like that. My dad served in 2 branches of the military. He was highly specialized, but he was working all the time, 60, 80 hours a week, and never could seem to break through and break free. My mom would supplement that. as well. So we have these working parents, and often they're blue collar and they're, workers, they're trade workers like my parents. And they're doing their best. They're trying to give their kids everything they can, but they're still not they're not able to break through their jobs and through their financial life. And that was like that for me. And my parents worked full time. My mom supplemented, and we still couldn't buy Christmas presents. We still could barely buy clothes. And sometimes food was scarce, and we would have to get our Christmas presents from Salvation Army or the clothes closet. Our home was given to us at a discount by the Habitat for Humanity. So we were always a part of these charity organizations, even though my family worked all the time. So that was my personal background. And on top of that, my mom was a child in post-war Philippines, and she herself was a child prostitute because she was one of 7 kids. And my grandmother said, look, either we starve or you get into the sex trade at 15. So that was my background. And my parents were, good people, even though they were constantly struggling with money, and it put a lot of stress, and there was a lot of violence, and there was a lot of verbal abuse in the home. So this is a vicious cycle. When you're not feeling good about yourself, and you're not feeling good about money, and you're not feeling good about your career, it comes back home and it goes around and around. And a lot of Americans are caught up in this cycle. And a lot of Americans who even make more money, such as my clients who make well over 6 figures a year, they feel this way too, because they similarly have grown up in similar circumstances. And through hell and high water, they want to break through and never go back there. And maybe materially they have not, but emotionally they still are there. And what I aim to do through my background and through this book of, coaching and coming to the solution that was all the way up magical for me, was to help people move past all of that, but to reconcile those childhood feelings that we get subconsciously that affect our financial and career decisions.
Wow. And I mean, first of all, what an amazing story. And thank you so much for sharing that vulnerability to give a little bit of light. I think it's important for people to know where the journey has taken them. And I think there's a space where there's so much inside of that, right? I know as the kid that used to have the bright orange lunch tickets because it was free lunch, I would actually rather not eat, because they didn't have the cards where you didn't know what kids needed meals or not. It was fluorescent orange, and it was about this big. And it was one of those things that you were mortified being in that space. And my dad was military as well. And especially when my parents divorced, it's really when things came often. And when you're in that space, so talk about kind of twofold. One, what is that like as a child growing up in an environment where that cycle is just kind of handed down as a generational legacy, right? We really have, most families don't create a stop point, right? It just is the generational legacy that keeps getting handed down one generation after another. So what does that do from a child's perspective, coming from your own experience? And when you start to make that shift, how does that impact or create healing or start to change the cycle now that you're an adult and you're feeling some things differently?
Yeah, I mean, for the free lunch, I was a free luncher too.
Was it not mortifying?
Well, what we had to do was that we had to say our name. So, and then they had to have a list of all the free lunchers on there. So I know exactly. But the thing is that I was so freaking hungry. I did not care. I was at breakfast, lunch, anytime I could, because I was so hungry all the time. So I know exactly how you feel about that. Well, the thing is that I talk about in the money formula is about going back and looking at how we feel. And when we're children, we look to our parents, for better or for worse, for our paradigm of the world. We love our parents unconditionally, and so we believe what they say. And think about this for a second. How many of us have heard our parents say, money doesn't grow on trees? We don't have enough money. We don't have no money for that. We have to work hard. We have to scrimp and save for everything we have. There are other people who have the haves and the have-nots. So we get all of these beliefs, and we hear our parents, and of course we love them. So we believe them, and we integrate that into our consciousness, and then that plays a role in our life and our decision-making. Now, sometimes it's not even as blatant as hearing our parents talk like that. It could simply mean seeing your parents' behavior. If you see your parents fight about money, for me, I saw my parents fight about money, but they never came to a resolution. They never made a step forward. So I learned to believe that, oh, parents just always disagree about money, but they never actually make a change. So we have all these patterns in here. And as adults, we sometimes become conscious of them. And then we go, I'm not going to be that way. But for some odd reason, we can't extricate the feeling between that thought and that memory. And so the goal of the money formula is to disattach the feeling with the thought, so that way we can neutralize the memory and it's in our mind, but it doesn't affect us on an emotional level, because we are emotionally driven characters. We're not really logical. We could know that splurging on something isn't right for us, but we feel like we deserve it, right? So there's that disconnect between the thought and the feeling, and that's where childhood comes in. We are programmed through, it doesn't necessarily mean traumatic situations. It could just mean by those situations that we have a heightened awareness of.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense. And so I'm curious, as you have introduced this money formula and you're really out there teaching that, you're helping organizations with it, you're helping clients with it, what is one of the first strategies or first things people can look at if they want to really disrupt that pattern? And I agree with you, there's such a disconnect between the thought and the emotion side of things, and trauma or not. I think a lot of people think, oh, you have a money story because you have trauma. It's not about the trauma. Everybody has a money story. I mean, there's people that have too much in their mind that have never learned how to manage their money effectively that have a different money story. There's every one of us has a money story. It has become so ingrained in our culture. How do you start to disrupt that thought pattern that is, in some cases, at least what I found, for people, it is an anchoring belief in their self-worth? How do you start to disrupt a pattern where their reason that they believe X of money is also oftentimes the reason they believe Y of themselves?
Yeah.
And so there's, how do you start to go down that path?
Well, we associate money with our self-worth. And we think that our money is the determinant of our self-worth when it should be the other way around. And that's where I talk about in the book, is to really look at our relationship to money, because we have a love-hate relationship to money. And if money doesn't love us, then we're not lovable. And one of the principles that I talk about in the book is that you have to love your money and you have to treat it like your best friend. We don't use money. We love money. Because we don't use our best friend. We love our best friend. So it is a relationship thing vis-a-vis who we are. And also we have a self-perception of our own value and what we give to other people. And we think that everything is quantifiable, and it's not always that way. So I really talk about is looking at our self-worth and also looking at how can we disrupt that. To answer that question more specifically, the number one place we start in the money formula is examining that very first thought that you have when you hear the word money. And it's instant and automatic. You cannot avoid it. You hear the word money, and some people will say, I don't have enough. You hear the word money, and there is none. So there's always a connection to that. And that's the first place when you are acknowledging, what is my money formula? It's hear the word. Now, it's not just about the word money, but it could be about every other word in the financial dictionary. It could be debt, credit card. These are a whole bunch of words that we have an emotional association with, but it always starts with that immediate first thought, which starts that chain reaction of either self-sabotaging or self-affirming beliefs. And that's where we have to understand that if we're having self-sabotaging behaviors, there's somewhere along the lines that we feel like we're not worthy of money, we don't deserve money, or there's not enough of it in our life, and that money doesn't love us back, or we don't love money and we're not treating it right. So that's where I would say is start with that first thought. That's the indicator of where am I going? Is it in the right direction, or is it sending me back?
Yeah. And so much I love about that. And I will say personally, I know the power of that distinction that you're talking about, from going from saying I'm using money for whatever to I love money. It was a radical shift for me in my business when I worked with a money coach who literally, that was the conversation we had, was how do you learn to love money? Love money. First of all, I mean, money, and it's one of the things that I will bring forward for people, is money is so neutral. It has no bias whatsoever. It is absolutely neutral. It is only a mirror and reacting to whatever you're putting into it. It's simply an energy, right? It's an
Right.
And it's interesting to hear you talk about that. Very first thing is to really get into thought, because sometimes it's not even about the direct line between abundance or scarcity. It's about whether or not you're qualifying money as good, bad, or indifferent. And it's all of those variations of how you feel about money and what you're saying about money. Because I think for some people, they'd say, well, I don't know if there's a thought that shows up, but there's a feeling that shows up in their body, right? And so that first space of that distinction, I love that that's the first place that you start to engage with people when it comes to the money formula. What is the typical length of time when somebody's really committed to stepping in? I know everybody's different, but when you get somebody that's really committed to clear out some of those patterns, to really face some of those conversations and those thoughts, what typically is kind of the process then, or the time period it takes for someone to shift into something where they're opening up access for more?
Well, I say in my book, you can do it in 7 steps, 15 minutes or less. And it really, truly does work. When I discovered it, it took me less than 15 minutes. And I was like, oh my God, I've suddenly changed how I feel about money, and got to the root of it, that core memory, and then neutralized that emotion. So I tested it out. I tested it on my husband. I tested it on my best friends. I tested it on clients. I tested it on strangers. And it literally works in 15 minutes or less. The thing is that you start with one word and then do another word and do another word and do another word until you're systematically going through your financial dictionary to neutralize it, and then place a positive connotation to it. So it really is going in, finding the negative connotation, neutralizing it through the money formula steps, and then adding a positive connotation, which I call a truth for you, and then moving forward in that space. In the book, I talk about having a purpose for money, because money is indifferent in terms of whether you do something bad, like, buy nuclear weapons or to hurt other people, or if you're doing, there's a lot of money in the arms business, right? But why talk about having a plan and a purpose for money? And many times, Candy, I'm sure you've heard people say, well, if I had, $1 million, I'd be happy. And that's just not true. That's not true.
Well, it's interesting because I just saw a quote. I don't even know what I was watching. I was watching The Minimalists. I was watching the documentary this weekend that was talking about, it's not about getting rid of everything. It's about making sure that everything you has a purpose, right? Which is a lot of what you're saying. And I've one of the biggest ahas for me in my own money journey has been that making sure that money has somewhere to go. It has a purpose, and money needs to be in constant flow. Because there was 2 things I heard that really powerfully reiterate what you're saying. And one was, think of money like water. Water always has to be moving or it gets stale, and if it stays still, it gets toxic. Because when water's not moving, that's when all this stuff festers and all that. And I was like, what a beautiful analogy about talking about money. Money is fluid. Money needs to be moving. It needs to be not hoarded, it needs to come out and it needs to come in. It's like the ebb and flow of the tides, right?
Yeah.
And the other one I heard was Jim Carrey made a comment where he said, let me reassure you that money doesn't make you happy. He's like, and someone said, well, of course he can say that. And it's like, no, but he can say that because he came from this. And as somebody who now is in this space, really clearly sees that happiness is not a derivative of either one of those spaces. Happiness is a choice that has nothing to do with. And if you really want to change that money story, what you're saying, you work on the happiness piece first, and money is just the result, because it's mirroring back that self-love that says, well, of course, then it's just automatically being attracted and moving in that space, because it's a congruent alignment to how you're feeling as yourself. If I'm hearing you correctly, that's the essence of what you're saying, right?
Absolutely. I believe that true abundance and wealth is all a result of experiencing and having more of what you love and being able to share that. That really fundamentally is that. The money formula definitely helps you to improve your financial situation, but it's not all about that. It's about really truly having a clearly defined purpose for your money, but also having a defined purpose for your life. So you could have $100 million and then you can squander it. There's a lot of lotto winners out there who've gotten several $100 million and then they blow blow it all, and then they're not happy. We're asserting in the book specifically is that you have to come to the understanding that you have a purpose in life, and there are things that you're supposed to be doing. Money is a resource for you, but what is the point of money if you don't have a good relationship to it, and if you don't have a purpose for it, and if you're not fulfilling your own purpose through service in life? So we're actually asserting people to really look at, what am I doing with my time, my money, my energy? These are all precious resources. Money is just one of them, but to really examine, am I living a life of purpose? Am I fulfilling it? Am I using my resources wisely? And most importantly, what's important to me? For me, Candy, it might be completely different for you. I spend a lot of money on childcare. You might not. Maybe you want to buy a boat, and that's great. But if you say, I want to buy a boat because that's a way for me to share time with my family and my children and my friends, great. But for me, my children's education is important. My social life is tied up in my kids' school. That's important for me. So being able, through the book, to identify what's important for Candy, what's important for Leslie, will help you to identify what is, in fact, the true meaning of wealth for you.
Right. And that in itself is the crux of everything when people talk about wealth and abundance. I actually challenged, I have a mastermind group that I challenged. I said, imagine for a moment, you could get everything you wanted and money never had to be part of the equation. Would you still be happy? If you could have the house you want to live in, if you could, because before the paper currency and the coin currency, people had other exchanges of things. If you could have everything you want in your life and live life on your terms, does it matter whether it comes from actual money or that it's you opening up access for things that are showing up in different ways? Because I really think we've gotten so caught up in a space that wealth and abundance is all about, how many numbers are in your bank account, how many zeros, what's in your pocket, versus, to your point, are you living your life on your terms in a way that says, these are the things that make me happy. These are the things that make me feel like I'm alive, I'm here. And do you have a place that you can stand in a purpose to serve and help others along the way? If we could do that, does it matter where or how it comes?
Exactly. I think for us in planning, our book tour, the Women's Financial Freedom Tour, it's been that big lesson of, getting resources from other places, collaborating with our community partners to bring this message of abundance and breaking through working poverty and helping women take their financial life back into their own hands, which in and of itself is priceless. And we've seen that it's not just about having dollars, but it's actually relationships and spaces and encouraging. So there's way more to that than just the actual dinero, right? And, when it comes to businesses, money is obviously a success factor. We use it to determine whether or not the business is a success factor, but that's business. But in our personal lives, we really need to understand that there is a healthy balance in getting a certain level of income, resources, and also having this feeling of abundance. And sometimes we can have all the resources. I've got clients, whose family had vacation homes in Palm Springs, who traveled everywhere, kids that were in private schools in Europe, but there wasn't that much love. And, love wasn't a great resource. You know what I mean? So they had these resources, but they didn't. And it's about, the money formula is about looking at all your resources, because you could have a ton of money, but you might not have a lot of love, or you might feel like you don't have a lot of time. And it's really about looking at all your resources and balancing that to feel ultimately your life is in so many ways abundant.
Yeah. And that's where, to your point earlier, everyone's equation around that balance is going to look different. Everybody has a different formula where the rules of the formula apply, but what they need to see across the board in terms of the resources that they want for their life, what's important, how they're spending their time, for every one of us, it's going to look different. And that's the magical part, right? We get to decide. And it's interesting because I have a lot of, clients that are, and with myself being a former engineer, they get into a space of, well, this is the equation. And it's like, yeah, 1 and 1 is 2, but so is the square root of 4. And 298 minus 296 is also 2. And if there's also infinite numbers in our number system, isn't it true then that there's infinite ways to? And I think about what you just said, and I'm like, there's infinite ways to create a formula that works for you. It's just a matter of you getting honest with, yourself to say, what is my formula? Because I've found, and I'm curious in your thoughts on this, and I know for me personally, I struggled. There's this idea, and this is one of my stories that I've worked on, is that, you know, it's materialistic to want things that are nice, or to want things that are more than what I already have when I have enough and sufficient and whatever. And you get in that space where when you're, and I just had a client yesterday, even we were talking about it, and I said, you keep saying you don't want this, yet when you're talking to your person in the relationship, you're telling him you're not seeing that. So which is it that you want? It was about an engagement ring, and it was about whatever. She's like, I said, I think you're in your mind saying, I don't want to be like all those other women that say they need to have X. And yet you're saying that for you to feel like you're in a committed relationship, you want that symbol and gesture that's a, so which side of the equation? And it was interesting because we had a conversation that it came down to, I think I really need to be honest about what I want. And I find that people struggle with sometimes asking for more or asking for bigger, because a lot of that language and a lot of that, especially if it falls into the you want the boat. And someone says, well, what if I don't want the boat because it gives me more time to spend with my family? I just want the boat because I like being on the water and it's nice and I want a boat. And there's an instant judgment that starts both from ourselves and when we put that to other people. Because people are like, oh, you want to save the animals and save the kids? Of course you want to have $1 million. But somebody that wants to use it for a different purpose that may not be in a category of, to your point, good or bad, right? We have nuclear weapons, we have whatever, money doesn't care. I feel like sometimes that holds people back from being open about what they really want to create that formula that's going to work for them. Mm-hmm. Versus pushing against it all the time.
Yeah, I have an example from the book. It's about this man named Peter in the book, and he wanted a raise. He wanted more money. And we worked on it before I came up with the money formula. It kept coming back to the same thing. It's like he was waiting for his superiors, his CEO, to give him a raise. And so this guy, Peter, he goes in and he asks the CEO, I would like a raise for X, Y, and Z. And he had certainly earned it, right? But the CEO went away and never gave back an answer, never followed up, nothing. After a face-to-face meeting, just completely just ghosted him. And so we did the money formula and we went back, and his memory connected to this wanting more money, right, was when he was a little boy, he would call his friends and talk to the parents and say, oh, excuse me for disturbing you. I was wondering if so-and-so could play, but the parents would always say no. So what we determined is that his association was to more money equals happiness, but happiness for him was approval. So to have more money, he needed approval, because that was his doorway to get what he wanted, which was more money to have to share with his friends, family, whatever. So when we looked at his money formula, we had to see the conflicting thing. We want more money, but you want the approval. And I said, well, what if you didn't have to get his approval to have more money, waiting for your CEO to give you money, but maybe you opened it up and said, I don't need anybody's approval to have more money, but I'm just going to be willing to have that money come to me. So we worked on that. And then in a couple of months, what had happened is that he left that job and he got a better paying job with more money, less work, and then he got a huge inheritance after that. So he didn't need the CEO's approval to get money. So it was really looking at the conflict. I want more money, but
the but, right? The big
I need approval.
But
we need approval. So that was like one story from the book. Another one is I did one. This is one interview I did with a woman, and I asked her money formula. She was an older woman, and I asked her, what does the word wealth mean to you? And in her mind, she goes back to this memory many, many, many years ago when she was a kid, and she said, well, when I was a girl, my grandmother was so rich. She was a landholding woman, and she had a ton of money, but she only wore one dress every day. That's it. And this woman was so rich. And I was wondering, as I was interviewing her, I go, well, that explains why she only wears one outfit every day, first and foremost. The second of all, which we found out was her definition of wealth meant frugal.
Yeah.
So she wanted to have designer clothes. So she gave herself designer clothes, but only one a year. And she wore that one outfit every single day for an entire year. It was crazy. But that for her was her definition. And so when you asking earlier, how do you reconcile that? It really is to go, okay, well, what does that mean, wealth? You know, what does the boat mean to me? And it's by using the money formula, I encourage to examine, positive or negative connotation alike, what does that word really mean? And is it self-affirming or is it self-sabotaging? And that's for you to find out.
Well, and it's interesting because it's a lot of the work that we do as well. It's amazing how we use words interchangeably all the time. Wealth being one of them, success being one of them, abundance being one of them, congruence, alignment, passion. Very rarely do we hit pause to say, what does that mean to me now? Because my definition of wealth when I was 20, 28, 30, is very different than my definition of wealth at 45 and building something bigger. I mean, I remember one of my never in a million years when my whole world was about financial security, was making sure I wasn't where my parents were and wanting to make sure. So I killed myself through degrees and college and climbed the corporate ladder and played 20 years in corporate and left a cushy 6-figure job to do what I'm doing now. And one of the final deciding moments was when I got a raise at my last job that between merit and variable, it was like 19%, which is ridiculous. And I literally went, and it's time for me to go. And one of my friends said, did you not just say? And I'm like, yeah, and I don't feel like I showed up in a way that earned that based on my definition of success now. And it feels like it's just more money, but there's nothing meaningful for me behind it. And I'd rather put that aside and go step into a place where I feel like I'm open and happy and living my life with great intention. And I know I can make that again. That's just, it just is, right? And it was one of those things that was such an eye-opener for me to start the journey of working through some of those definitions, but not hitting the pause button, not getting in a space that says, how do I define that for me? Not for my spouse, not for my boss, not for my parents, not for me. How do I define success? How do I define wealth? How do I define happiness? Those are such an opportunity for people to get grounded. And so I love, and I want to make sure that I don't forget to do this, because we are talking about a book that you've created that really helps people go through this. What is the name of the book and where can people find it?
The name of the book is called The Money Formula. Change your relationship with money in 7 steps in 15 minutes or less. And you can find it on Amazon. You can buy it directly from us. You can get a hard print, a paperback copy and a digital copy on Amazon, but you can also buy a paperback copy directly from our store. Just go to leslieinc.org or themoneyformula.leslieinc.org. If you order it through our store, you actually get a signed copy, a personal note from me, and some Leslie Inc. goodies. So I recommend going that way just because it's more fun that way. But yeah, it's called The Money Formula, and you can check it out there.
Awesome. Because I want to make sure, and I know I'm going out to get my own copy. I think this is just fascinating. And I have worked with even the people I work with on, the journey I've taken through my own money stories and the work that I've done working with coaches and I don't feel that I can't grab this information enough. I think there's so many opportunities for us to think about that. I know I even have a group right now that's working on, we've had conversations about the soul of money and the energy of money. And I'm like, ooh, I see another tool that they can.
Yay!
So I love that. And I really encourage all of you that are listening that twofold. One, that are finding great interest in what Leslie has to offer. I know if you go out and check out the work she's doing, you will be blown away. So I highly encourage you not only to get a copy of her book, but go out and see the work she's doing. And I want her to speak briefly just a moment on the tour and what she's doing. And for those of you that might be feeling a little triggered right now, I highly encourage you to sit with, we talk about that a lot on this show. There are often times where there's things that we talk about and get into that are going to create triggers for you. And you always have a choice when that trigger shows up. You can fight and push and try to stuff that trigger down, or you can allow yourself to be curious, invite it to the table, and have a conversation with it. And so I'm going to ask that for some of you where you're like, that you also go out and purchase Leslie's book and engage in a conversation that could leave you curious versus you trying to push the rock uphill and trying to punch it in the face, which never works, and really allowing yourself to receive the fact that this is such a beautiful gift. And it truly is just an honor having you on the show. The one thing I want to talk a little bit about as we're kind of rounding things out, one of the things we've really laid into this year, or gotten into, is this idea of imagine if. It's taking that very negative, anchoring what if that usually spins people down. It's a lot of where those stories come from, right? Mm-hmm. And it's changing it into a passionate, purposeful, and powerful imagine if. And as I hear you talking about this tour, and I hear you talking about carrying this message out, what is the big imagine if for you as you're helping more people rewrite or be curious or figure out the money formula for themselves?
You know, it's so interesting you asked me this question, because one of the principles is the imagination is the secret to that wealth and abundance. So it's really cool that you're rounding it out that way, because that is one of the core principles. My imagine if is really about empowering the families who are going to be reading this book. Because I don't think that we have to suffer. I think sometimes suffering is the default for a lack of knowledge and ignorance. But I'm hoping to really raise awareness to what is possible for families, happiness, health, abundance, resources beyond what we could imagine, not just dinero, money, dollars, yen, but really looking for how rich are we if we were to examine that. So that way the children of tomorrow, we can figure out other problems. We can solve other things rather than the scarcity mindset thing. So I really want to empower families. I'm one of 4, and I have other stepbrothers and stepsisters. And really empower communities, protect children, and bring a better tomorrow. So that is what I'm doing this all about, for a happier tomorrow.
I love that, because that's so plays. And I tell people all the time, I'm like, imagine if we could plant the seeds in our youth right now and in the places, because I do a lot in business, because that's what we bring back into our families. And I want to break that cycle where it's starting, right? A lot of this scarcity mentality, a lot of this energy, a lot of these things. And so I think about, imagine if 10 years from now, you and I were being challenged that we had to coach something different because we were in a different space now. People had elevated. I think about how awesome that would be, not to have to go back and break down all of the learnings, but be able to kind of elevate and lift from where they are at, because all the work had been done to change those cycles. And so I love hearing you say that, because I think about that. I'm like, imagine if in 10 or 20 years, our businesses were restructured, because it's no longer people that have to rewrite their story. It's about people opening up a bigger imagination and playing field. And I mean, that just gets exciting thinking about what would that even look like, right? So
exactly. This feeling that you're tapping into is what we aim to do with the money formula, is to really tap into your imagination, to ask yourself, if I wasn't thinking about not everything I don't have, and if I wasn't thinking about how everything is struggling and hard, what would I be thinking about? And it's really being of that one singular purpose and one singular mind, instead of ping-ponging back between, oh my God, I don't have enough, and oh, but I really want more. So it should be in that one singular focus. And if as a society we could become of one singular focus, how much more we can achieve. Because I believe, with our book tour, awakening and empowering women's financial freedom is giving back to America. And what could women in America do if we weren't having to deal with this? What could we do? And we control like 80% of the consumer spending,
right? Yes.
I mean,
we unfortunately don't have that as wealth for ourselves. We control the decision making. We don't, and that's been staggering to hear some of those statistics about how much there's a disconnect between those two spaces. So.
Exactly. So we want to bring all of that into one unified mind for women. And as we're doing that, we're touring North County, San Diego, and we're inviting women to come and be community organizers. Bring me into your space so we can have a meaningful conversation about money that's purposeful and inspiring, so that way we can have a better relationship for today and a happier tomorrow.
I love that. I love that. And once again, please let people know how they can reach out to you, how they can get access to your book. I want to make sure people know where to find that.
Again. So again, just go to themoneyformula.leslieinc.org. You can find me at Leslie Inc. on Instagram, official Leslie Inc. on Facebook. We'll also have a private group for readers of the book, so you can ask me questions at any time. We can go even further, some inside information. We'll even have an online course, Money Formula Academy, that will be found in the book, so you can go and register for that. And that's an actual live workshop with me and real people who I work with in the Money Formula. There's just so many resources. Essentially, themoneyformula.leslieinc.org is where you can find us.
Awesome. So as we're closing this out, first let me just extend my deepest gratitude for you being here and sharing your light and your gift with this audience. I know that it's been a powerful conversation. I know I'm going to get a lot of conversation and comments around what's showing up for people as a result of this. And I really look forward to hearing from you, those of you that do choose to go out and buy Leslie's book, what's happening as a result of that. And so Leslie, thank you so much for being on the show. Just truly admire the work that you're doing and so deeply grateful that you're here.
Well, thank you, Candy. You're amazing. I love your show. Your podcast is awesome. And you're just a great host all around. I feel so good. I'm so happy being here. So thank you again. And I look forward to another time.
That sounds wonderful. We would love to have you back. And if there was one thing you would like to leave this audience with before we say goodbye, what would it be?
A smile goes a long way.
Amen to that. And so with that, thank you again, Leslie, for being here. Just so deeply grateful. Absolutely love what you're doing. Thank you, all of you, for continuing to join us on this journey and be part of these really powerful, meaningful conversations. Please continue to check out the great lineup of speakers we have, to share their message, share their resources with you. And I love that. A smile goes a long way, right? So say yes to yourself, learn to destroy the noise, and know that leadership is ultimately your choice. It's a choice in how you choose to show up. It's a choice in how you choose to serve others. And it's a choice in how you choose to take personal responsibility inside those two spaces. With that, this is Candy. I will catch you next time. Thanks, everyone.